Good afternoon, Panthers. My name is Tony Hicks. I'm Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction and Accountability. It's an honor to share with you this evening the plans for our Return to Learn Your Path to Success for the 2020-21 school year. So, this afternoon, I'll be sharing with you a little bit about who served as our task force members in creating this plan, our recommendations for the coming school year, as well as our communication considerations, the challenges that we'll face, and then lastly, end with celebrations. Our task force members made up elementary, secondary, and district level. Our task force members spent many countless hours coming together through the course of the spring as well as over the summer in order to craft this plan. We took into account the survey results that we sent in June and then in July in order to really be responsive to all stakeholders in creating a very responsive plan. So that first data point, if you will, back in June, that first survey, we asked families, students, and teachers, what is your preference of returning to school? And as you can see from this model, the first choice was a traditional model, school students returning to school with safety and wellness protocols. The second choice was the hybrid model, where students return to school with a combination of face-to-face and online learning. And then the last model of choice was the online model, where all students and staff return to primarily an online platform. And so we took that information as well as other details from that survey to craft our recommendations. And those recommendations fall into two categories. We have our in person instruction, that very traditional, if you will, type learning environment where kids are in class with a teacher. And then we have our remote learning environment, and that's made up into two areas, asynchronous and synchronous. Asynchronous are those recorded lessons where you can record a lesson and maybe it falls a day after the live lesson. It's a recorded lesson that's sent out to students where they can watch during the time that is convenient for them, or when families have time to work with students. Perhaps they need more guided approach, and so parents are needed there. Our synchronous model is our live version, where the lesson is captured live and our students are participating in that live session. Synchronous can be a live lesson or it can be components of a live lesson where maybe students need some additional support. Maybe they're struggling with a concept. And so that individualized teaching can also happen during a synchronous lesson. In breaking this down into grade levels, we looked at pre-K, pre-kindergarten through second grade recommendations. And our commissioner, Commissioner Morath, has said that remote learning for our pre-K through second grade is asynchronous, and understandably so, right? That our students at the younger grade levels really need that adult with them to help them in facilitating the learning with them, and challenging for our younger learners to do that in a synchronous environment. You also think about the fine and gross motor skills that our students are developing, as well as learning to read, needing that adult interaction, in a hands on approach. Teachers, though, will have set schedules to meet with students through virtual whole group, small group, and individual throughout the week to provide that more detailed learning environment for them, or perhaps the supports that they need to excel with specific standards or a particular concept. Students, if they participate in an asynchronous environment, must complete daily activities to be counted present. So every day, the students must do work in order to be counted present. And please know, going forward, this is one of the feedback pieces that we received, is that our standards, this will look very different than it did in the spring, and that as students are progressing, they're receiving that timely support and encouragement from our teachers, that our curriculum is following the state required Panther curriculum. And as a result of that, those lessons are delivered as well as supported by our teachers. Our students are assigned a dedicated classroom teacher to provide them with those online learning platforms. So for pre-K through first grade, we're utilizing Seesaw, and we have training modules set up for parents to be able to access Seesaw, as well as for students, and then Google Classroom for second grade. We do ask families to commit to a 9 week or 6 week period for their online learning, for their remote learning. And I say 9 weeks because at pre K, pre kindergarten is a 9 week reporting period, and then kinder and on up is a 6 week reporting period. For third grade through eighth grade, we'll see remote learning is conducted in an asynchronous environment as well as a synchronous environment. And that means learning is a two-way instruction between students and teachers throughout the lesson. So perhaps it's asynchronous where the teacher is recording that lesson and sending it to the student and then providing support through a synchronous environment. Maybe they're checking in with the student, maybe they are providing a mini lesson for the student, but again, it's an asynchronous as well as a synchronous environment. Courses follow the student's schedule just as they would during a school day. Students will have access to all the core subject areas as well as their PE, specials, and electives in a remote environment. Addresses all of the state required curriculum following the pacing guidelines per Panther curriculum. And as parents, we do make that available for you to monitor our Panther curriculum. Every unit of study is available there for you to be able to access. Students are assigned a dedicated virtual classroom teacher, just as they're assigned a classroom teacher in an in person model, they're assigned a dedicated remote learning teacher. And then that one of the requirements for that is that students interact on a daily basis and they complete daily assignments. Grades are assigned in guidance with the district and campus grading policies going forward. This is not like the spring. This is a very way that parents are accustomed to our grades is what we will have going forward. And so, parents, you'll be able to access those through Skyward just as you would in a classroom environment. You'll be able to access for your remote learner those grades in Skyward as well. And students also being able to monitor their grades through Skyward. Again, just as we did in the earlier grades, students remain in that remote learning environment for a dedicated 6 week time period. For high school recommendations, again, very similar to third through eighth grade, it's asynchronous and synchronous. They have a dedicated teacher, a virtual remote teacher dedicated for them. However, at high school, it can be in many platforms. So we utilize what's called the Texas Virtual School Network, Edgenuity, Google Classroom. We also utilize the Texas Home Learning and also college courses. So if our students are participating remotely, just as they would if they were in person, they'll still have that support through University of Texas or ACC or Angelo State University. All of our dual credit and our on ramps courses will provide it online as well as in person. As we've said earlier, all of our standards address the state required curriculum through our Panther curriculum. So, teachers, whether they are remote teachers or in person teachers, do follow our scope and sequence for delivery of curriculum. Students are assigned a teacher to facilitate virtual learning and provide supports while students are progressing through that coursework. Grades are assigned in a traditional manner, just as they've done prior to last spring with our traditional district and campus grading policy. Students remain in a remote learning environment for a 6 week period of time. So, again, asking families to commit to that 6 week time period. In July, we sent out another survey and we asked our families if school started tomorrow, which mode of instruction would you select for your student? And as you can see, these percentages here 59.2% elected for a face to face in person learning, and 40.8% selected a remote learning. This was very helpful to our task force, again, as we continue to refine our learning platforms. For communication and staff development, we know this is a key piece, a big rock, if you will, for us as we go forward. We've got to provide the training for not only our teachers, but also for our families and our students to be able to navigate through those technology platforms of utilizing Google Classrooms, of what the platform looks like for Seesaw, how parents can access it, and how parents can stay on top of progress monitoring their children to make sure that they are meeting the requirements of the course. Again, as I've said earlier, this is very different than the spring in that what you're going to find for in person instruction is very similar to what we're going to provide for our remote learning instruction. So it is very rigorous, it's very rich, it's very meaningful, and is very connected with Liberty Hill ISD. Instruction for students with special education and 504 plans that will continue just as we were in person will happen in a remote environment. Every educator follows those 504 plans or those IEP plans. Teachers videoing lessons is another big staff development rock for us. It takes some time to get used to how to video a lesson and making sure that our teachers have enough practice time before they facilitate a lesson itself. And then training for our attendance clerks because we are running two plans of learning, if you will. How to take attendance won't be as challenging for that in person because our attendance clerks are very familiar with that. But how do you take attendance in a remote learning environment? We want to make sure our attendance clerks know how to do that and are equipped before the first day of school. A big piece to this, of course, is how we're providing feedback to our students and our parents about the progression of learning for our students. That'll be a big training platform for us. And then what we've done is because we know this is a lot of information, is we've created a principal playbook for our principals so that everything is accessible to them in one spot. We did the same thing for career and technical, is because career and technical education, it does have a lot of hands-on experiential learning and we want to make sure that our teachers have all the needed resources in one spot. As we go forward, we are preparing for short and long term closures. And by doing so, we're asking for several things to happen. So, if you come back in person and we ask you to go ahead and register for the Texas Home Learning, or we ask you to go ahead and try out a recorded lesson, our thinking is that at some point in time, it may be a need for everyone to be remote or some people to be remote. And we want to make sure that you've had time to practice that. And so, learning from home will provide training for that for staff, students, and families, as well as training on the Texas Home Learning from TEA. So here's a little snapshot of what that training looks like. We went ahead and did. It's kind of modeling, if you will, for our staff members, an opportunity for them to see those training pieces in a video format before the first day of instruction. So, our teachers right now are not back on contract, but we sent this out to them so at their leisure they can go ahead and start accessing those trainings. We did the same thing for our parents. If you go to our website on the Return to Learn website, you'll see that there are resources for parents. And so many different videos are available there for our parents to access. And go ahead and start familiarizing yourself with all the technology needs. Our challenges going forward, by no means have we fully accessed every technology piece, and we did that intentionally. We're trying to keep this as simple. If we accessed every technology piece, it could be very overwhelming to our families and our teachers and students, and learning all the different platforms that are out there. So we try to keep things very streamlined. Seesaw, again, for pre K through first, and then second on up is Google Classroom. Career and technical courses. So again, very experiential learning. You can imagine welding. We're going to need to see that weld. So there's some challenges there where not able to do that type of learning in a remote environment. It may be necessary for our students, if they chose a remote learning environment, to come for that one class if they chose welding, so that we can have that on hands-on practicum experience. Our early childhood courses, we recognize that, again, that's very experiential, fine and gross motor skills, learning by doing. And so those are some of our challenges. If our families choose remote learning, it's going to need additional resources that we will make available to our families. Specialized services, I talked a little bit about this earlier in that we will follow our IEPs and our 504 plans, and not just for special needs, but also for our gifted and talented, as well as our dyslexia services. All those specialized needs and services will be provided in a remote environment just as they would in person. Counseling services, the health and wellness, the social and emotional well-being of everyone involved going forward is of great importance to us. We want to make sure in a remote environment that we have coached our families about setting aside time for outside time, for disconnecting from the computer, for how to connect remotely with their peers, of how to establish relationships with our teachers in a remote fashion, and we do that through our counseling services and having a very detailed plan. So that leads me into that social aspect of school. In a remote environment, it can be somewhat challenging. And so we're going to be very intentional about that going forward and making sure our kids in a remote environment have ways to connect. Performance classes, we know this is a challenge and a concern from families. What is choir going to look like in a remote environment, but also in an in person environment? And so, in a very performance based classes, you can think about theater, choir, band, those performance classes, and making sure that our students are safe. Their safety is of top priority. And then, how do we also facilitate the lessons for those performance classes? Is going to be a challenge. Celebrations, certainly in the spring, want to celebrate our parents rather, for their patience and grace as we navigated uncharted waters for the spring. A lot of this was kind of learning during the motions of, and you, as parents, have been incredibly patient and given us grace as we've learned ourselves from the spring. But from that learning, we will have a robust plan in August, ready to hit the ground running so that our students don't miss a beat, and we're making sure that learning is progressing regardless of what platform our families choose. Want to celebrate our teachers and their flexibility and understanding. Lots of our teachers gave up their spring break in order to help us craft plans for the spring and then also through the summer to make sure that we were ready to go come August. Our task force members for their tireless commitment over the summer and really carving through all the plans that we created. Certainly appreciate all their work and making sure that we are hearing the voice of everyone in our district. And lastly, but certainly not last, our students. Our students of today grew up with technology, but not in a learning kind of way. And so their willingness to engage in this new learning environment, we talk about champions, and our students have certainly been champions through this. So I greatly appreciate everybody coming forward and sharing their thoughts and input. If you need anything, any questions that you have, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thanks so much.